welcome back, regular viewers. This is Wednesday Night Sessions. I am your host, Mitch Nobis. Thank you a ton for joining us, everyone out there, whether you're watching this on an actual Wednesday night when we debut the episodes or Thursday or whenever on your lunch break. We're happy you're watching it whenever you're watching it. I am thrilled about today's episode. Kelli Russell Agodon is a poet from the Pacific Northwest joining us today, and easily one of my current favorites. Her most recent book is outstanding. She'll introduce you here in a second, so I won't take up too much time. But I do want to let you know that you should seek it out. It is fantastic from front to back. So I'm going to toss it over to you, Kelli. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. So I am Kelli Russell Agodon, and this is the new book. It's Dialogues with Rising Tides from Copper Canyon Press, which is an independent press here in the Northwest. It's running out of Port Townsend, Washington. So I'm able to drive to it, which is really special to have with a press. I am the editor and co-founder of Two Sylvia's Press, and currently we're working on a new project called The Weekly Muse to help poets stay accountable to their writing, where each week we check in with them in their inbox on Sunday mornings with poetry prompts, places to publish their work. And it's a passion project for my partner and I, Annette Spalding Convey. It was created because poets needed help getting back into writing after this pandemic, which has been hard for a lot of us. So that's who I am. And I'm just going to read a few poems from the book so you can get a feel for it. I chose kind of my 3 greatest hits from the book. If my poems were like Freebird and someone was at my concert, they would shout, play Freebird, except they would shout, play Hunger or read Hunger, which is the first poem in this book. And this book deals with a lot of things to do with the environment, relationships, some mental illness stuff, including suicide, but it ultimately, I think, ends with hope, and that's what I was hoping for. So I'll read the first poem for you. It's called Hunger. Hunger. If we never have enough love, we have more than most. We have lost dogs in the neighborhood and wild coyotes. And sometimes we can't tell them apart. Sometimes we don't want to. Once I brought home a coyote and told my lover that we had a new pet until it ate our chickens, until it ate our chickens, our ducks, and our cat. Sometimes we make mistakes and call them coincidences. We hold open the door, then wonder how the stranger ended up in our home. There is a woman on our block who thinks she's feeding bunnies, but they are large rats without tails. Remember the farmer's wife? Remember the carving knife? We are all trying to change what we fear into something beautiful. But even rats need to eat. Even rats and coyotes, and the bones on the trail could be the bones on our plate. I ordered Cornish hen. I ordered duck. Sometimes love hurts. Sometimes the lost dog doesn't need to be found. I like to read that poem because it's got humor in it and then it gets a little dark. And so people are left with this strange feeling of I was laughing and now a cat was eaten. And I will say that no animals were harmed in the writing of that poem. No cats actually died. So this next poem came out of an experience of seeing someone have a breakdown. And I'm always interested in the way people react. I think it was Mr. Rogers who said, and if there's an emergency, look for the helpers. And so I'm always looking for the helpers and trying to be one the best I can. But This poem comes from that. It's called Magpies Recognize Themselves in the Mirror. And I don't know if you could hear that bird that just flew by as on key, but magpies are one of the smartest birds and they do recognize themselves. Magpies recognize themselves in the mirror. The evening sounds like a murder of magpies, and we're replacing our cabinet knobs because we can't change the world, but we can change our hardware. America breaks my heart some days, and some days it breaks itself in two. I watched a woman having a breakdown in the mall today, and when the security guard tried to help her, what I felt was all of us peeking from her purse as she threw it across the floor into Forever 21. And yes, the walls felt like another way to hold us. And when she finally stopped crying, I heard her say to the fluorescent lighting, "Some days the sky is too bright." And like that, we were her flock in our black coats and white sweaters. Some of us reaching our wings to her, and some of us flying away. And I'll end with what's my favorite poem in the book. I don't know if you're allowed to have favorite poems, but I don't know if they're like children. And you're not supposed to pick a favorite, but I did. This poem was also made into a film by a very talented filmmaker, Sarah Dern, and that's online and it's stunning if you ever want to check it out. The poem is called Love Waltz with Fireworks, and it's about falling in love with the world, which sometimes happens. Love Waltz with Fireworks. 17 minutes ago, I was in love with the cashier and a cinnamon pull-apart. 7 minutes before that, it was a gray-haired man in Argyle socks, a woman dancing outside the bakery, holding a cigarette and broken umbrella. The rain, I've fallen in love with it many times. The fog, the frost, how it covers the clovers, and by clovers, I mean lovers. And now I'm thinking how much I want to rush up to the stranger in the plaid wool hat and tell him I love his eyes. All those fireworks, every 17 minutes exploding in my head. You the baker, you the novelist, you the reader, you the homeless man on the corner with the strong hands. I've thought about you. But in this world, we've been taught to keep our emotions tight. A rubber band ball where we worry if one band loosens, the others will begin shooting off in so many directions. So we quiet. I quiet. I eat my cinnamon bread in the bakery, watching the old man still sitting at his table, holding his handkerchief as he drinks his small cup of coffee. And I never say, I think you're beautiful, except in my head, except I decide I can't live this way. I walk over to him and place my hand on his shoulder, lean in close and whisper, I love your Argyle socks. And he grabs my hand, the way a memory holds tight in the smallest corner. He smiles and says, I always hope someone will notice. Thank you for listening.
Kelli, thank you for that. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
The hardest thing about hosting the show is that there's literally 100 things I want to respond to right now, and I have to only pick two. So I'm going to try to combine some of them. First off, I love the way you admitted out loud that we have favorite poems, right? The writers have favorite pieces, and that it feels like you're at a concert, because like your whole setup right now has a complete like Nirvana unplugged on stage vibe to it. And I noticed that before we even hit record, like this is such a it feels like a writer's space just watching you right now. Like you got the two Sylvia's typewriter over here, the book cover pillow over here. Like it's just all very cool. And it does have poetry has a rock and roll element to it, not necessarily in spirit, although often it does, but just in that notion of putting together a reading, you're picking which hits to play, and you absolutely just played 3 hits. I was very happy because like when we record these, I'm the only audience member here for the moment, and it feels really like special and guilty almost sometimes because like I get these greatest hits performances and like I'm muted, so I'm over here like, yay, she played the hit. I'm rambling, but like I just love that because like so few poets acknowledge that there is that kind of on stage element to it. So thank you for playing the hits. It also raises, I had a couple of other questions, but I'm going to ditch them and go with questions in response to what you read. So you did mention that there are kind of favorites oftentimes as you put a collection together. And we talked about before I hit record that, you know, I have a manuscript I put together a collection that is yet to be published. And I always wonder about the sequencing and like, did I put them together in a good order? So often I'll take one out, put a new one in. So if you would just kind of talk to us about that process for a minute. For, any viewers out there who aren't big poetry readers, Copper Canyon is like an esteemed press. Like it's an awesome accomplishment to get a book with Copper Canyon. So like, how did that process go? Like, how did you put the manuscript together, decide which ones stayed in, which ones came out? Did any of your favorites not make the cut for some reason? And anything like that, just kind of talk to us about it.
Yeah, well, Copper Canyon was my dream press, and that so much of poetry is luck and timing. You know, my manuscript was picked from the slush pile out of 800 manuscripts that were there, and it was because an intern read it, an intern named Britt, read it and was an advocate for it. So just always remember, so much of this is subjective. And I do feel, as Susan Rich and I, she's a poet in Seattle, and my friend are working on a book that we're finishing up called Demystifying the Manuscript. And it shows all the different ways you can put a manuscript together. I mean, you can throw them all up in the air and then pick them up, and there's one way to order your poems. But I always feel starting, you don't need to go chronological because a lot of people are writing about family things, but you really want a poem that kind of introduces your topics, grabs the reader's attention, and I always view the first poem as a handshake, kind of like, here I am, and here's what I want to share with you. And it is hard. So this is a funny story. You asked about greatest hits. I was reading some eco poems, and this book definitely has, so many eco poems. And I have a poem that I took out of this book that should be in it, that I now want to like slide in. So we don't always make the best decisions for our books because sometimes we think we might, a poem may lose favor with us. Like, oh, I've read that one so many times, it's boring. And then you read it a few months later and you're like, why isn't this in the book? Well, because we put so much time on it. So I would say putting together a book and choosing your top hits, put poems that really are handshakes to the reader, that invite them into your collection, kind of tell them about maybe some themes you're going to do. Like that poem had humor and darkness and coyotes and dogs, and those are all themes throughout my book. And it was like a little postcard sized poem. It wasn't a lot to take on. And so it kind of was, hi, I want to share with you before we go into a poem like I wrote about, like the suicide of my grandfather's suicide. I might not start with that because I haven't quite met you yet. And I don't want to scare you away. I want you to be part of the journey. And so this book has what I call an emotional arc. So it starts in one place emotionally, kind of darker. At one point it gets pretty dark, but I don't want the reader to like disappear on me. So I always put glimmers of hope, and then it hopefully comes to a place of, I forget what the last section is called. The last section is called Relief. So I wanted to leave the reader with, okay, you made it through. I'm always looking to reward my reader in different ways. So.
I love how much your answer kind of repeatedly came back to this notion of a relationship between the author and the reader. And then I have taught high school for years and years, and I get frustrated with how much the universe expects us to treat books as like holy artifacts. Like, and I say over and over again, like, no, the meaning is not sitting there in the book. The meaning is in your brain. Once you process the book through it, like, you are part of the deal. Like, the audience is part of the meaning making. It's not just in the text itself. So I love the kind of awareness there to a reader. And we never know who the reader is, of course, right?
Right.
Knowing that there will be one, and that you have to set the book up in a way that works for them.
Right. And knowing that every reader will bring their own stories to the book. And so every person is going to get something different from this book based on what they're bringing with them. You know, it was like I read a poem about an apple tree, and at the end of the reading, a woman came up to me and said, "I'm so sorry about your miscarriage. And that poem you read meant so much to me because I went through a miscarriage." That poem was absolutely not about a miscarriage, but it was for her. And so I felt like I kept that space and offered that, you know, I'm so sorry for your loss. And the poem meant a lot to her because her story was that, and she brought it to the poem. And in that way, as a poet, like, that's one of the biggest gifts, is that poem was then enlarged for me. So I got to see it in a different way.
That's so cool. Yeah. All right. I try to keep this show. This is what I was saying earlier. Like, there's 1,000 follow-up questions to that. But theoretically, we're only a 2-question show, and the second question is usually not writing related. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. It is related to one of your poems.
Okay.
The last poem you read is a perfect interview question in and of itself. What's some random thing in this world that you've fallen in love with recently?
That I've fallen in love with recently?
Yeah, the socks. You fall in love with the socks in the poem. So what's something since the poem and now? What's something else?
Oh my gosh, I'm always falling in love with things. Last night I watched the old movie Before Sunrise with Ethan Hawke.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me get out my old journal from 1992, my travel journal, and I fell in love with that. So now I'm falling in love with travel journals. A poet on Twitter then tweeted their journal from a page from their journal in 92. I fell in love with that. I'm constantly falling in love with the baby animals. There was a duck the other day. I woke up sitting in my hedge for no reason, right? And looking into my living room window, and I fell in love with that duck. Yeah. So I think I'm constantly falling in love with things. I fall in love too much with smoked cheese, way too much with smoked cheese. Fallen in love with banana bread recently. Again, it's been a year-long relationship. Those are the things. And constantly falling in love with just people in the world. A friend sent me a photo he took of these two men sitting outside. There were no phones on the table. They had brought a bottle of wine and a bowl of cherries, and they sat outside talking in this restaurant that had closed down. No one knew they were around, and the picture looked like it could have been from any decade. So I fell in love with that too.
Absolutely. Oh man, those are such great answers. Kelli, thank you so much for taking the time to do this for us today, for reading and giving us so much context to your work. Just a fantastic episode for our viewers, and thanks for taking the time to do it for us.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. All right, to our regular viewers, we'll see you next time. To our new viewers, we hope you come back. The season, we usually do one episode every Wednesday until we run out for the season. So hopefully we'll see you again next time. All right, thanks everyone. Take care.
Bye.